Well, since the U.S. decided to start the tariff war, I'm excited to talk with you today about all things tariffs going on, obviously, in the U.S. and Canada, where you are, and then also around the globe. It's been a very interesting time, to say the least. Seems like every single day something changes with tariffs, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. I mean, I try to publish an op-ed, and then while I'm writing it, everything changes, and I have to rewrite it again. So it's that often that things are changing. Almost every 20 minutes, sometimes every hour. It's been a really confusing time.
It really has been, and hopefully by the time anybody sees this, things are still consistent. We'll see how much things change. But when we first started talking about tariffs was really before Trump even got elected. This was one of the things he said he would do on day one is impose 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico. Since then, a lot has changed. Some things have been reduced, a lot has been expanded, I would say. So maybe we can start off and talk about what's going on with Canada in particular and what tariffs are looking like for Canadians potentially from the US. Are there going to be any retaliatory tariffs from Canada? And what does this mean for consumers?
So as we say often, tariffs are just a tax on your own people, and that's really true. So when Trump goes and imposes a tariff on Canada, he's really imposing it on his own people. So Americans are paying the price for tariffs. Their groceries, their clothing, their everyday essentials, pharmaceuticals, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, it's going to go up. The prices are going to go up, and the affordability crisis that we're seeing both America and Canada is going to get worse. So in Canada, we responded, our governments provincially and federally responded pretty aggressively because we know that it's going to affect our economy, it's going to affect the American economy, and we just don't want to deal with a trade war. So we pushed back, unfortunately, with retaliatory tariffs. And I say unfortunately because, again, it's a tax on your own people. That means Canadians' lives are going to get harder. Consumers are going to have to pay a lot more. But that's just how we responded to it, to see if we could perhaps dissuade the United States from going forward.
Good luck.
It didn't really work, but we are pursuing that path still. However, there have been signs, for example, in Ontario, that we will back down if there's some reciprocity in that as well. So we might be saying we're going to put this percentage on this product, or we're going to shut off the lights in 3 states.
Which one of those is mine, so yes. I'm really hoping they don't.
I'd really like to not have to do it, Liz.
Please.
So we are doing all these things, but it's showing that we are willing to back down. We're not we don't have our heels so hard to the ground that we're not going to negotiate. And I think in a trade war, negotiation is key. The conversation has to remain open, and I'm hoping that that's what continues to happen.
I totally agree. I would hope that we could have negotiation without tariffs, and that tariffs would be a potentially last resort. I'm certainly disappointed and alarmed with how quickly President Trump has been advocating and, putting forth a lot of these different tariffs. And again, it's not just, a couple, 1 or 2 small ones. They're massive tariffs that, again, as you said, tariffs are just taxes on consumers. They trickle down, and the consumer is going to be paying those increased costs. So that's not great. There's a lot of industries that are going to be affected by this, of course. As you mentioned, energy is a big one. President Trump is very committed to becoming more energy independent for the U.S. However, we rely on a lot of Canadian energy, especially for a lot of our northern states. So that is obviously a concern. The alcohol industry has definitely been a big one online. So what were you guys doing with all that Kentucky bourbon?
We're taking them off the shelves.
And then what, you just dump them out, or?
Just hold on to them, I guess, until things get better.
Their investments.
I'm not really sure. So that's exactly what happened in Ontario, the province that I live in. The directive from the Premier was to tell the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, to just remove all American alcohol off the shelves, and they did right away. You cannot purchase American liquor at your local LCBO. I do find them sometimes in grocery stores. Mm-hmm. They still have them there because they just didn't take them off the shelves. Yeah. But the fact that you can do that is kind of ridiculous. And that's a whole story about the government owning the liquor control of in Canada. But that's
LCBO
a whole other
needs reform.
Yes, that's a whole other video. But it's actually making an impact in the United States because I'm sure you'll talk about that. The governors of places like Kentucky are saying, "Oh no, This is going to impact us very, very harshly. Even people who might agree with Trump are speaking out against this because it's hurting the economy so much. So.
Yeah. I also find that some of these actions are somewhat performative. We've been talking about this a lot. It's like, what is the point of these tariffs even? And it's tough. I'm sure we both agree. I don't appreciate our politicians playing chicken with our checkbooks. Mm-hmm. We are not, pawns in this game of theirs to do, again, who kind of knows what Trump's goal is here. I mean, obviously there's been rumors of what he wants, but no one is really sure. So that's a big question. But the one thing that I also find performative is like when we are taking items off of shelves, those ones weren't tariffed yet though. So now you're like, you can only get them if they are tariffed. Yeah. So that's silly. And we see that a lot in other industries as well. Another industry that I'm concerned about is the motor vehicle and automotive industry. Being from Michigan, that's a big part of our local economy and state economy. And what a lot of consumers don't know is that Canada actually exports a lot of motor vehicle parts to the US for us to actually assemble the final vehicles. And so if that gets jeopardized as well, we're gonna see car prices go up, and not just for, your foreign cars, but even your American-made cars, your Fords, your Chevys, all of those are also going to go up because a lot of those parts come from Canada or other parts of the world. So if we're going to tariff that, that's not great. Another industry I definitely teased a little bit that I want to get into is pharmaceuticals. Canada is a big maker of insulin that comes to the U.S. Anything to say about that?
That's true. And just to talk a little bit more about what you're saying here, the idea that America doesn't need anything from Canada is just blatantly untrue. It is absolutely categorically false,
yes,
as you see from what Liz is saying. But also, we do produce a lot, probably half or more of the insulin that is being used, which is a very essential drug to people. It's a life or death drug. If you don't get your insulin, it's just humongous effects on you. And if we're gonna put tariffs on it, if you think your pharmaceuticals are expensive now, they're gonna get much worse.
Yeah.
And it's also gonna affect the industry in Canada, obviously.
Yeah.
Who's importing this drug, but the story is a lot bigger on pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I would agree. And what's interesting is that, we've seen tariffs before, right? It's not like we've never seen tariffs ever.
And they've never worked.
They never work, yeah. Spoiler alert,
so to make sure
tariffs never work.
It's clear.
Yes. But what's interesting is when it comes to pharmaceuticals have never been tariffed. They've always been carved out. They've always been an exception, because governments have agreed that people getting access to the medicine they actually need is far more important than a trade war, which I think is really interesting. But unfortunately, pharmaceuticals are in the mix right now with tariffs, which is interesting. The United States is obviously the #1 producer of research and development in innovative drugs. However, we still rely on international sources, whether it's the active pharmaceutical ingredients or generics or whatever it may be. We rely on other countries as well. And so again, we could see shortages come through, could see people not having access to the medication they need. And like you said, with insulin, it's life or death. And some of these other drugs as well, same thing. So that's unfortunate. I just want to highlight too something you said. President Trump has been on this like America First talking point for a long time. And I think there's some value in, boosting American manufacturing and things like that. However, you're totally correct. America can't do everything on its own. There's a reason our economy is so globalized and why free trade is so important. Everybody has their own comparative advantages, right? We can't be #1 at everything, even though we might like to claim we are. We're clearly not. And we rely on other people who do things better than we can, and then we can provide what we do best, and we trade. And that's how we all thrive. And so at this point, with our economy so integrated and globalized, to put forth these tariffs is just going to be extremely disruptive. And I'm hoping we can walk these back before they get put forth entirely.
Yeah, there are some indications that perhaps there will be some walking back before April 2nd, which is when all of the tariffs are going to be imposed on everybody. So I'm hoping for that too. The impact in Canada, so we have an election that was just called. Our federal election has just been called, and of course tariffs is going to be top of the priority list on what the leaders are going to be talking about at the debates, when they're meeting with their constituents. all across the country, and Canadians are upset about this.
Understandable.
Canada and the United States have such a long history of a close bond and friendship, especially in trade, but Canadians are very upset. They're not buying American products. They're going out of their way to find Canadian or international or alternatives to things they buy at the store. People are turning over things at a Costco so that so they know, and then they just keep them turned over so the next customer knows that it's American, don't buy it.
Wow.
There's a huge movement of people saying that they're not going to go vacation in the United States, and we're seeing that it's actually, that people are just saying it, they're actually doing it. So it's really sad to see, because Canada and the United States have been friends for so long. Free trade makes enemies friends, and that's why it's such a beautiful thing. And to hurt this thing that brings people together and closer and allows consumers to live better lives, it's just, I don't see a positive.
Yeah, free trade makes enemies friends. Trade wars make friends enemies.
Exactly.
So no tariffs, please.
So as we go into this election, I'm expecting these federal leaders to start talking about how we negotiate away from tariffs. I'm really hoping that that's how they're speaking about it, not how we hurt America even more, because really at the end of the day, we'll be hurting ourselves.
Totally.
Consumers have so much to deal with in Canada and the United States right now with the affordability crisis, the housing crisis. I don't think they can take much more.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but even if just the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canada and Canada doesn't do anything retaliatory, consumers both in the US and Canada are still going to feel the effects of
Absolutely.
that. And then obviously compound that with retaliatory tariffs, then it's just a nightmare in the making. So hopefully we can convince the administration, or someone can convince the administration to not go forward with these tariffs. They're not a good idea. I wish our president, the U.S. president, would say what he wants and stop skirting around with this art of the deal on tariffs and trade wars and negotiations.
Yeah.
But we will see.
So Liz, we talk a lot about tariffs, but there's a lot of other things concerning consumers in the United States. What are some of the things you're most worried about these days?
Well, one thing that I'm working very hard on, and that's taking up a lot of my energy, I'm very excited about, is pushing back against these horrendous vaping bills that keep popping up. I'm sure my colleagues will chuckle because I talk about this pretty much every day. But we keep seeing more affronts to lifestyle choices of consumers, which is really frustrating. In particular, we see bills throughout the states, on the state level, coming through a lot of different committee hearings. And essentially they are either increasing taxes on vaping products, banning flavors, repealing preemptions, limiting the ability of sales in certain stores or online, and just bad policy in general. Another one we see too is nicotine-free generation, which I know it has been talked about internationally as well. Spoiler alert, hasn't worked internationally, certainly won't work in the US. But it's interesting, especially for us in the US, we obviously have a history with prohibition. Another spoiler, it didn't work, so I don't know why we keep going back to that playbook to pull things out. For us though, it's important that we maintain these products on the market for consumers, especially when it comes to nicotine alternatives. Vaping, of course, is 95% less harmful than smoking. And then also we're seeing a lot more products come to the market, whether it's nicotine pouches, which are very popular now, heat not burn products, all sorts of things that are coming to market that are helping consumers move away from combustibles.
So I have a question for you. You just made a really good point that vaping products and products outside of cigarettes are actually much better for you than cigarettes, or help you kind of quit. So why is there so much pushback against them? Like, what is your theory on why everybody wants to ban them or sell them in certain places, or whatever is going on?
Yeah, I would say the bottom line is that they're concerned about youth access and youth use of these products, which I can appreciate. I don't think youth should have access. That's why we have a lot of laws, both federally and state, that prohibit anybody from under the age of 21 from purchasing nicotine products. That obviously is very helpful for that regard, but that's the and a lot of the bills that we see, that's the motivating factors. Let's prevent youth from accessing it. The other side too is just there's a lot of misinformation about the less risk involved with these nicotine alternatives. I see way too often that people equate combustible cigarettes and vaping as the same thing. And they're like, well, vaping is just as harmful as smoking, if not more harmful. And that's just not true. There's been many studies done that have shown that, again, vaping is 95% less harmful. And we're seeing similar studies come out with pouches and the other alternatives as well. So for us, especially when we're trying to improve public health, to eliminate or reduce the market of these less harmful products while still just maintaining the open market for the combustibles is insane to me. And if we don't make that switch, we're going to see more folks get sick from smoking-related illnesses and diseases. We're going to see that burden be passed on to states and then taxpayers. And one thing I like to point out too is Sweden, always. Sweden has done an amazing job in this area. They've really embraced the idea of harm reduction when it comes to tobacco. They decided to keep taxes low on nicotine alternatives. They allowed a full range of flavors. They have since reduced their smoking rates by over 55% in the last decade.
That's amazing.
They are the first country that is supposed to be smoke-free according to the World Health Organization. They're on track to do that, which means I think less than 5% of the population smokes, which is major. And again, they did this not by banning any products, but by embracing and allowing these alternatives to be accessed by consumers, and providing, in some regard, financial incentives to make it cheaper for them to actually get these products. So my hope is that the US can follow suit in what Sweden has done and start embracing evidence-based policies in this way. We haven't seen it much yet, but we're working on it, and hopefully we can see some change.
Well, we look at countries like Sweden and think, oh, they have such high quality of life. Isn't that nice? I wish we had that in the United States. And then we look at why.
Right.
Like, oh, why don't we do that? Oh, because nobody wants to do it.
Right. I know, and it sounds kind of crazy, but again, like prohibition doesn't work. So we can't just ban things, and we don't need more of a nanny state, in my opinion. Consumers are able to make choices for themselves, and the government should allow consumers to be able to do that. And I think there, is some value in having regulation to make sure products are up to standard.
Yes.
But the way the market has shaped up in the US, there's such a rise in the illicit market that the legal market can't really compete with the illicit market. Because we haven't set it up in a way for these products to actually be available, which is problematic. So,
are you saying the prohibition doesn't work?
It doesn't work. It didn't work in the 20s. The war on drugs still exists, but it didn't work there. I mean, anything that we try to ban, it's not banned. Right. It just moves from the legal market to the illicit market, which again, there is no product standards, there's no safety standards, there's no age verification. It's like the wild, wild west. So we would want the government, ideally, to be able to set up a legal, competitive, and free operating market. So that way, consumers can get what they want.
Well, I'm really glad that you're working on this. So thanks for everything you're doing on that, Liz.
Thank you.